watching UATV English. We broadcast from the heart of Europe, Ukraine's on air. Hello and welcome. My name is Anna Nichenko. One of the tasks of our Western partners in the sanctions policy is to block Russian economy and countries that trade with Russia. In this case, the Kremlin won't be able to continue the aggression in the way it wants. So this is our topic for today. So the Russian currency has passed beyond 100 rubles per dollar. Such a jump in the exchange rate on the Moscow exchange occurred for the first time since March 2022. The reasons for the fall were cheap loans, high federal budget, expenditures primarily for the continuation of the full-scale aggression against Ukraine, and low demand for rubles. After all, no one wants to stock up on an unstable currency, which is also highly dependent on political risks. In addition, Russia's main source of foreign exchange is oil and gas exports, which have fallen significantly due to sanctions. So it turns out that there are few dollars and euros in the Russian economy, but a lot of rubles.
They are trying to solve their economic problems at the expense of the population. The thing is, when you have a big deficit, after all, they don't have enough money. Remember, we talked about it 2 months ago, when they had already fulfilled the annual deficit and so on. And there are not so many ways to solve the issue, to fill the budget. One of the bad options, by impoverishing the population. This is the devaluation of the national currency.
In other words, the Russians have the same amount of rubles, but they can buy much less with this money. In the first place, imported goods are goods with imported components.
Imports to Russia will become more expensive. This is the very first, shall we say, direct connection between what is happening and what will be. This means that since Russia has an import dependence on many groups of goods, respectively, these goods will either increase immediately at the ruble devaluation rate, or if they have only important components, this will increase the cost of components. Maybe not by the amount by which the ruble devalued, but it will still increase the cost of final goods.
I'll remind you, in mid-July, Moscow announced its withdrawal from the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which made it possible to export Ukrainian food from the Black Sea ports. This was followed by massive missile strikes by the Russian army on Ukrainian granaries and port infrastructure. And the Kremlin promised to destroy all ships going to Ukrainian ports as potential military facilities that could transport ammunition and weapons. But Russia didn't succeed in becoming the mistress of the Black Sea.
Russia, which began to talk about the Black Sea almost as if it were its own, must now understand that it does not control any part of it. Not a single ship of the Russian Federation is safe. The new geopolitical reality has significantly strengthened Ukraine's position in the negotiations to extend the grain agreement. Russia can no longer lead them from a position of strength. On the contrary, the Kremlin needs negotiations with the SBU on an oil corridor for its ships. Taras Zagorodny, political and economic expert, from the publication of the Censor.net.
After the withdrawal of the Russian Federation from the grain agreement and the Kremlin statement about the actual military blockade of the Black Sea, Kyiv warned that from July 21st, it would consider ships that go to the seaports of the aggressor country and to Ukrainian seaports in the territories temporarily occupied by Russia as carrying military cargo.
We warned that Ukraine does not want any war, and that if they start shooting, we do not have that many ships. But they must clearly understand that by the end of the war, they will have 0 ships, 0, if they do not stop killing the civilian population of Ukraine.
The battle for control of the sea could have serious implications for the global energy and food markets, experts say. For Russia, control of the Black Sea is an obvious military objective and one of the reasons it annexed Crimea in 2014. It's just that this goal is not achieved. Moscow increased the cost of transporting Russian wheat, Reuters writes. According to experts, the escalation in the Black Sea will hit the volume of Russian exports as shipping companies are wary of sending their ships to Russian ports. We will discuss more this topic with our guest, Yulia Pavitska, analyst of Kyiv School of Economics, is on air. Hello and welcome, Yulia.
Hello.
On your opinion, Russia is in the top three countries where the currency has depreciated the most. Why did the Kremlin decide to let the ruble fall freely? Because we understand that the exchange rate in Russia is completely depends on political will, not the rules of economy.
Well, I wouldn't say so on the 100% because, to our unfortunate, the Russian central bank it managed to maintain a minimal level of independence, and it still sticks to the monetary rules and tries to target inflation, which means that exchange rate on ruble is being formed on the market due to the demand and supply of the currency inside the country. And moreover, Russian central bank was quite successful of fixing the situation and cutting the initial shock from the full-scale invasion and sanctions on the banking system and financial system as a whole. So, and we already have seen the high peak of ruble exchange rate back in March when it was 120 rubles. So now all the attention is coming from this psychological level of 100 rubles that it has exceeded. However, if we look on the dynamics, the ruble has been gradually falling since last October. And this is already more structural problem because they have deep problems with their balance of payments, which is 85% down compared to the 7 months of the previous year. Also, their trade balance is down about 70%, so their exports are falling while they have increased imports and more demand on imports. Moreover, if we are talking about how their trade is now being organized, they have switched to more friendly country, and the number of contracts and the volume of contracts in the hard currencies, meaning in dollars, it becomes less. So now, according to the CBR, about 40% of all export transactions are being done in rubles. So they are in lack of the dollar currency inside the country, while they need more currency to fund their imports. Also, I want to mention that in last year, Russia experienced and faced the biggest outflow of the capital from the country. It was about 250 billion US dollars that left Russia, and another 27 billions left for the first half of this year. On the other side, we see that usually central banks try to help local currency with the interventions on the exchange market, for which they need international reserves. But all resources that can be used for such transactions are blocked by sanctions. And Russian central bank is basically left with rubles or gold, which are not as liquid to do fast transactions. So that's why we see all these emergency meetings of the central bank. They hiked again the core interest rate by adding 350 basic points. Probably they will come back to the currency restrictions and force exporters to sell the currency because falling ruble triggers Russians. And we need to remember that in post-Soviet country, exchange rate of local currency is almost the single economic indicator, which is highly monitored by the ordinary people. And when it falls to some critical level in their minds, that makes them thinking more actively that they're becoming poor and poor, and that creates more disruption inside the society, which is very bad for the Putin's regime. So that's why now they will be in the rush trying to cope this situation and restrict the fall of the ruble further.
You say that they feel, but how Russian citizens feel? In which spheres they feel now most for this drop of the ruble?
The main impact is the falling purchasing power of Russians, and they indeed each month become less and less able to buy the same amount of goods and services on their salary that they receive each month. But officially, of course, they won't be communicated. So on the opposite side, the Россtat recently reported that the real disposable income of Russians in the second quarter of this year has grew by 5%. And this only the mass trick and the trick of the Россtat, while the ordinary Russians see that the price tags in the markets they keep rising. Also, there is another very loud example of what that Russians becoming poor and poor, that for the first half of this year, the number of people who were declared bankrupt in Russia increased by 30 points, and it's like 160,000 of people are being bankrupt now. Probably in the summer, the effects are not so visible as a lot of people doing gardening and raising own products. But if Russian authorities won't manage to keep the inflation and ruble under control, then in summer, the situation for the Russians become more severe and hard.
And one of the Russia's demands for the restoration of the Black Sea grain agreement is the restoration of the connection to SWIFT. Why is this important so much to the Kremlin, and how much does it affect on the economy?
So if we're talking about the grain deal and their demands on restoration of the Rossельхозbank to the SWIFT, it's more about Russia tasting the waters of how and on what conditions and when sanction coalition can agree to lift some of the sanctions or restrictions on their economy. And we need to always remember that Russia, first of all, always plays with the issues of food security, and it really plays Hunger Games by attacking our stock of the grain, which was about to being exported to the world. So if we're talking about the effect of this delisting Rossельхозbank, because they're basically talking about main bank, it shouldn't make a big difference, because before the full-scale invasion, it was not the main bank in Russia, either not main bank on the agricultural transactions. But neither we nor our partners can be sure that if this bank will be again connected to the SWIFT, won't use it for other non-agricultural transactions. So far, all our partners are sticking to their idea, and there is a consensus that there is no way of lifting sanctions from Russia. However, each time when any negotiations around grain deal will be coming and will come on the plate, each time Russia will try to sneak and try to force countries to raise some of the sanctions.
Mm-hmm. And currently, one of the tasks of our Western partners in the sanctions policy is to identify and block enterprises and countries that trade with Russia. But what else can our partners in economic field do?
Yes, you are completely right that the main focus of sanction coalition is combating with sanction circumvention and closure of the schemes which Russia very frequently and in very fast manner creates to circumvent the sanctions. And that is why most of upcoming sanction packages and sanction decisions will all include some sort countries from third countries that help Russia to meet the sanctions. And I want also to remind that importantly that EU in the 11th package has adopted a mechanism which will allow to block the exports to the third countries of particular products that Russia then imports for their military complex. And very important to make EU be using this mechanism, not just adopting it as a legal issue. If we're talking about other mechanisms and sanctions that should be adopted, there is still much work beside the increasing the enforcement of sanctions. If we're talking about trade, we have still two major fields that are stay unsanctioned. This is nuclear energy and diamonds. If we're talking about nuclear, there is still very huge role and impact of Russia on the most of the countries of sanction coalition. That's why it's very hard for Ukrainian diplomacy to push sanctions on the nuclear energy. If we're talking about diamonds, then we see the dynamics that Russia already has rerouted most of the exports to friendly countries as UAE or India, and even the Belgium, which was against of ban on Russian diamonds, has decreased noticeably the imports of Russian diamonds. But here we come to the problem that to make this ban efficient, countries of sanction coalition, they need to develop special mechanism of identification of origin so that Russian diamonds won't appear and get to the Western market, even if the ban will be introduced. Also, there are plenty of work on the financial field, as far from all Russian banks are now sanctioned. There are still some banks that are serving Russian military complex, or some other large banks that are still connected to the SWIFT or not sanctioned by all coalition. We still have the problem that several major European banks didn't left the Russian market, and they still paying the taxes. And we as analysts and the international sanction group of Yermak McFall, we are calling for the strict measures and strict deadline for banks to leave the Russian market. So the work doesn't stop, and indeed, Russia now is one of the highly sanctioned countries in the world, and other measures that we are proposing now are really hard to push, because now also the some of these measures are affecting the local markets in sanctioned countries. So that's why it's harder to put them. And the third stream, which I also want to manage, that will be now one of the focuses, is the work with these countries who are potentially or actually helping the Russia. So we as a country and sanction coalition needs either to find out ways how to reroute the trade and become the trade with sanction coalition countries more attractive for these countries, so that they stop exporting and trading with Russia. Other indeed measures should be adopted to close all these loopholes that now Russia enjoys.
Yulia, thanks a lot for all your explanations. I'll remind our viewers it was Yulia Pavitsky, analyst of Kyiv School of Economics. So it was UATV English. We broadcast from the heart of Europe. Don't forget being with us. See you in a week.